Okay, now that we've installed SQL Server, I'm going to take you through some exercises to show you the basic operation of the management tools and some basic kind of development techniques so you can get going with SQL Server. So the first thing we're going to do is start up the SQL Server 2014 Management Express Studio. So I'll go ahead and start that up. And the first thing that happens when the Management Studio comes up is it wants you to authenticate. So remember during the installation instructions when we talked about having mixed mode authentication. In this window you can either log in using Windows authentication or SQL authentication, and since we installed both we can use either one. In this case I'm just going to go ahead and select Windows authentication, and it'll go ahead and log me into the database. So this is the Management Explorer Studio. This is the Object Explorer on the left, and you can see there's various menu options for different operations of the studio. The one that we're going to look at is databases. So right off the bat you get a couple of databases installed under the System Database menu. We're not going to be particularly interested in those in this exercise, but under here we're going to create our own database, put a little bit of data in it, and show you some basic operations of this tool. So I'm going to select New Database by using the right mouse click. I'll select New Database, and I'll give this database a name, and we're going to call it First Database. I'll select OK, and notice that it creates both a database file and a log file. So I'll go ahead and select OK, and you'll notice the green bar down there, and it has now created our database table. Or excuse me, not a database table, but a database rather. So underneath the database you see a number of different tabs that you can expand, and there's various ones such as a database diagram, tables, views that you can program later on, some programmability where you can put things like stored procedures and triggers and so on. In this case we're just going to select tables, and again I'm going to right mouse click on here on tables, and I'm going to select the table selection so that I'll select table, first name, and I'll give this a data type of 20. I'll add a last name, and we'll give this a data type also of 20, and I'll put in the email address, and I'll assign that just a little bit longer of 30 characters, and we'll go ahead and close this. And it asks me if I want to save the changes to this item. I'll select yes. And it asks me for a name for my table. So I'm going to call this employee. Select OK. And you'll notice right away that it doesn't show up underneath the tables icon. Where is our table? So if I right mouse click and I select refresh, now you can see the table. If I expand the view here, I can see the columns of that table. So that's kind of the quick and dirty way to create a table. Now if I want to look to see if there's any data on the table, I'll highlight the table and I'll say select top 1,000 rows. Obviously there's not 1,000 rows, there's no rows in the table. But this is the default SQL statement that will select data from the employee table. Now I'm going to modify this in a couple of ways. First, I'm going to modify the query window so that it defaults to the first database table. And I'll show you why that's significant in a minute. So now if I say select star from employee, and I execute that query, notice at the bottom no data comes up, which we would expect. We just created an empty table. So I'll go ahead and close this query window, and it's going to ask me if I want to save the changes to my query. I'm not really interested in that. If I right mouse click now on this table, I can say edit top 200 rows, and it'll bring up an edit window. So I'll go ahead and put some name in this table. So we'll start with Bob Smith, and we'll make up an email address here. And let's put in one more. So we have Bob Smith, Tim Brown, and Craig Jones. So now, again, I'll close this, and it will save our data to that table. Again, if I go back under our employee table, and I right mouse click and I say select top 1,000 rows, there is our entries. Again, I can show you another simple query. Let's say we want to know how many rows are in our database. You can use an aggregate function called count. I'll execute that, and we get what we expect is 3 rows. So now that we have some data in our database, I'll show you another simple operation, which is probably one of the most critical operations to know right away, is how do we back up our database? How do we make a backup copy now that we have some data in there? So if you go on the database, I'm sorry, if you right mouse click on the database, our first database icon, let me do that again. I'll right mouse click up here, and under tasks there's a bunch of different tasks you can do, and one of those is backup. So I'll select that selection, and the menu pops up, and you'll notice it has our database, a backup type. We want to do a full backup. It's going to back it up to a default location, which is a subdirectory where the software was installed. But I'm going to put it in a different place. I'm going to put it under a place that's much easier for me to remember, and I'm going to put that in the temp directory, and I'll give it a file name, and to be consistent I'll call it first database. So I have the directory and I have the file name. I select OK here. I'll remove the first location, our default location, so we'll only back it up in one place. I'll select OK, and notice it says it's successful. It shouldn't take very long. There's only 3 rows in the database. So now I'm going to go back under, and I'll bring up our query window again. I'll select the rows, and you'll see that. So I'm going to delete, again, I'll select first database as our default database, and I'm going to delete 1 row from the database. So there's a SQL command called delete from, so it's delete from, and then it's the table name, delete from employee, and then there's a where clause where first name equals Bob. And notice how Bob is in single quotes. That is in SQL how you have to specify strings. So if I execute that now, notice it says that 1 row is affected. And just to verify, we're going to bring back all the records again. And notice now we only have 2 rows as expected. So kind of to close that operation, say, oh, well, gee, I deleted a bunch of data. How can I get it back? Well, now I can restore that database from backup, and all our data should be intact. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go ahead and select Restore from the database menu. And I'm going to select From Device, where we backed it up. I'm going to add our location that we backed up to earlier. select C temp, and I'll give it our file name, which is first database. Looks good. We're going to restore into our first database. And I'll select OK. Our database has now been successfully restored. So now if I go back under our first database and I look at our original table, and now I select the top 1,000 rows, I now see the record that I had deleted earlier has now been successfully restored. So those are really the basic operations you need to know in SQL Server. We created a new database, added a table, showed some basic query operations as well as a backup and restore operation. Those are kind of the 101 hello world kind of operations you need to get going with the database. In subsequent classes and later lessons, we'll show you a lot more details on how to design an effective database, how to write effective queries, and then how to integrate those into code into C# and SQL Server. But for now, this is the basic lesson, and thanks a lot for watching.